Viewer discretion advised. This video contains deeply unsettling true accounts of real experiences. Content may be disturbing and is not suitable for viewers under 18 or anyone sensitive to fear-inducing material. If you are under 18 or easily frightened, please do not watch. You have been warned. Don't look away. There's a moment, and most people who have lived with strangers know exactly the moment I'm talking about, where something small happens, something that your rational brain immediately files under coincidence or bad timing, or I'm overthinking this. A door that was open is now closed. An item that was in one place is now in another. A sound at the wrong hour from the wrong direction, and you stand there in whatever apartment or dorm room or shared house you've been calling home, and something in the very back of your mind, something older and quieter than logic, whispers. Something is wrong here. Most people ignore it. The 4 people in these stories almost did. What you're about to hear are 4 accounts of living situations that started as completely normal housing arrangements, the kind of place you'd find on a listing site, sign a few papers for, and move into on a Saturday with help from a friend and a borrowed truck, and ended in ways that will genuinely make you reconsider what you know about the people you've invited into your life. These are real experiences. None of the names have been changed to protect the guilty. The innocent, however, I've given aliases. Stay with me. Because the first story? It starts with a cheap apartment in Chicago and ends with a man hiding under a bed. And it only gets worse from there. The man who wasn't there. The listing. I was 22 years old, 7 weeks out of college, and doing what most 22-year-olds do when they land their first real job in a city that isn't their hometown. I was completely broke and absolutely convinced everything was going to work out. The job was a marketing coordinator position at a mid-sized agency in the West Loop neighborhood of Chicago. Entry-level salary, decent enough to build on, the kind of thing you take, knowing it's a stepping stone rather than a destination. I'd been living at home in Indianapolis while I interviewed, and the plan was always to move to Chicago once I got the offer. The problem was the math. I had about $3,000 in savings and a starting salary that sounded reasonable until I began looking at rental listings in Chicago with any real seriousness. Studios near my office started at $1,600 a month. 1-bedrooms were closer to $2,200. Even rooms in shared apartments, the compromise I'd already accepted, were running between $900 and $1,200, which left me essentially nothing after rent and utilities, never mind food and transportation. I spent 2 weeks scrolling through listings every night, getting progressively more discouraged. Then I found the Post. It was on a general classified site, the kind that has everything from used furniture to job postings to apartment listings. The Post was clean and simple, private bedroom available in a 2-bedroom apartment in West Loop, utilities included, available immediately. The price listed was $300 below anything comparable I'd seen. The photos showed a clean unit, hardwood floors, decent kitchen, bathroom with actual tile instead of linoleum. I messaged the poster within 5 minutes of finding the listing. His name, he said, was Gerald. He described himself as a property manager handling the unit while the owner was out of state. He was available the next afternoon to show the place if I could come into the city. I took a half-day off work, drove from Indianapolis to Chicago, and met him at the address at 2 in the afternoon. Gerald was a tall man, thin, in a way that seemed less like natural build and more like something that had happened to him over time. He was somewhere between 45 and 55, that indeterminate age where someone could be well-preserved or prematurely worn and you genuinely couldn't tell which. His handshake was firm and went on a second too long. His eyes moved around a lot when he talked, Not nervously, exactly, more like he was cataloging the room rather than engaging with the conversation. He gave me a tour that lasted about 12 minutes. Kitchen, bathroom, living room with a window that faced an alley, my potential bedroom, small, clean, with a closet along one wall. Everything looked fine. Everything looked exactly like the photos. "You'd be sharing with one other tenant," Gerald said as we wrapped up the tour. "His name is Marcus. He's an extremely private person, works odd hours, pretty much keeps to himself. That's actually a plus in a place this size." He walked to the closed door of the second bedroom and knocked 3 times. Nothing. He knocked again. Still nothing. "Probably sleeping," Gerald said. He wasn't flustered by this at all. He said it the way you'd say probably traffic, like it was completely ordinary. "I'll make sure you two connect once you're settled in." I should have asked more questions. I should have insisted on meeting Marcus before signing anything. Instead, I was standing in a clean Chicago apartment at $300 below my maximum budget, and I did exactly what 22-year-olds with limited savings do. I filled out the rental application. Gerald slid across the kitchen counter, shook his hand again, and drove back to Indianapolis. Gerald called me the next morning. "It's yours," he said. The silence. I moved in the following Saturday with help from my college roommate Devon, who had a Jeep and a willingness to help that I repaid with a case of beer. We made 4 trips up the stairs with my mattress, my dresser, a bookshelf, boxes of clothes, a lamp, a mini-fridge, a television I'd owned since freshman year, and a collection of other objects that felt essential at the time and probably weren't. The whole operation took about 3 hours. In all of that time, all the noise and movement and doors banging open and closed, and Devon and I talking at normal volume through the living room and kitchen. Marcus never came out, but he was home. Between the second and third trip, Devon and I were both standing in the living room when we heard it clearly. Footsteps moving across the floor behind the closed bedroom door, slow and deliberate, crossing from one side of the room to the other, and then back again. Devon looked at the door, then at me. "He's not going to come say hi?" "Apparently not," I said. We both let it go. After the last trip, Devon hung around long enough to help me assemble the bookshelf, ate a slice of pizza I ordered for us, and then hit the road back to Indiana. I stood in my newly arranged bedroom and took stock. I was officially moved out of my parents' house for the first time in my life. The apartment was quiet. The city hummed outside the window. My roommate, whoever he actually was, had not acknowledged my existence in any form. I gave it an hour before I tried to introduce myself. I was getting up to go knock on his door when I heard it. The soft, unmistakable sound of his bedroom door opening. Perfect timing, I thought. I crossed my room in 3 steps, hand reaching for the handle, and then the front door of the apartment slammed shut hard enough to vibrate the walls. I opened my bedroom door and stepped out. The living room was empty. The hallway was empty. I went to the front door and opened it. The building hallway was empty, too. Just a faint trace of movement in the air, the kind you can't see but somehow sense. Marcus had walked through the entire apartment and out the front door in the time it took me to cross my room. He had to have known I was right there. He had to have heard me. He left anyway. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, for a while trying to decide how I felt about this. Annoyed, mostly, but also, and I didn't have a name for it yet, something else. Something that sat lower than annoyance. A vague unease I couldn't quite articulate. I ate dinner, watched something on my laptop, went to bed early. I woke up at 2:14 in the morning to the sound of the front door closing. It wasn't a slam, it was careful, deliberate, the kind of closing you do when you're trying not to make noise but not quite succeeding. Then footsteps on the hardwood floor, moving slowly through the living room, down the short hallway. I lay perfectly still, tracking the sound. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I sat up. The room was dark except for the ambient glow of the city through my curtains. I stared at the crack under my bedroom door where the hallway light crept through in a thin, pale line, and I saw the shadow, 2 feet, outlined in the light from beneath the door, standing completely still. My chest went cold. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I watched the shadow and waited for it to do something, knock, open the door, walk away. For almost 4 full minutes, it just stood there, still, like it was listening. Then the shadow shifted. The footsteps moved away from my door. I tracked them back down the hall, heard the second bedroom door open and close softly. I did not go back to sleep. What I did instead was lie in the dark for the next several hours, listening to sounds from Marcus's room. Heavy, rhythmic thumps, something being moved repeatedly, something being dragged, then repositioned. I couldn't identify it then, and I still can't now. I put my earbuds in and buried the sounds in music until exhaustion finally pulled me under, sometime before dawn. By the time I woke up, the apartment was silent and Marcus was gone. I spent most of that day on a slow orbit of the apartment, grocery shopping, buying a few things I'd forgotten to bring, getting a feel for the neighborhood. When I got back around 7 in the evening and dropped my bags on the couch, Marcus still hadn't come home. I cooked dinner, watched TV on the couch. The apartment stayed quiet. I made a quick run to a convenience store 2 blocks away, dish soap, a phone charger cable. I was gone maybe 15 minutes total. When I came back, Marcus's door was cracked open, just a few inches. Warm light spilling out from inside. I set my bag on the counter and stood very still in the kitchen. My heart was beating faster than I wanted to admit. "This is nothing," I told myself. "You knock. You say hello. He's been avoiding you because he's socially awkward, and now you're going to meet him and it'll be fine." I walked to the door, knocked twice with my knuckle, pushed it open. The room was empty. Not just he stepped out empty. Completely, entirely, comprehensively empty. No bed, no furniture of any kind, no clothes on the floor, no bag in the corner, no personal effects, no indication that any human being lived or had ever lived in this room, except for one object, a chair, positioned in the center of the room, facing the door, facing me. The kind of chair you'd find in an institutional space, plastic seat, metal legs, functional and impersonal. Just sitting there in the middle of an empty room as if someone had placed it there very deliberately. My heart rate doubled. My hands went cold. I reached into the room, flipped off the light, and pulled the door shut. I walked back to my bedroom with my back straight and my steps measured, the way you walk when your entire nervous system is screaming at you not to panic. I locked my door, sat on the edge of my mattress, pressed my palms flat against my thighs and tried to breathe. There was no Marcus. There was never a Marcus. I understood that with complete clarity now, standing in a locked room in an apartment I'd moved into 6 days ago, which meant that Gerald, the man who had rented me this room, had been lying to me since the moment I walked through the front door. I picked up my phone and called his number. 1 ring. Then I heard it. A ringtone. Loud, clear, impossibly close. Coming from inside my closet. The phone rang a second time and went to voicemail. 2 rings. He'd declined my call manually, which meant he was holding his phone, which meant he was in my closet and he was awake, and he had heard me moving around this apartment, and he had made a deliberate choice to stay hidden. Gerald was in my closet. I had a fraction of a second to think. I didn't try to open the closet. I didn't confront him. I got up from the bed, unlocked my door, moved through the living room without running, went into the bathroom at the end of the hall, and locked that door behind me. It was the only interior door in the apartment with a functioning lock. I sat down on the edge of the tub and called 911. What they found. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes. 2 officers, flashlights, the kind of calm authority that exists specifically to counterbalance situations like this one. I let them in and stayed back while they moved through the apartment. They searched the closets, the bathroom, behind the shower curtain, under the kitchen counter. They opened the door to Marcus's empty room and stood in the frame for a moment, taking in the chair, then moved on. They found Gerald under my bed, not in the closet where I'd expected him. He'd moved during the time I was locked in the bathroom. He was pressed against the wall beneath my mattress, flat against the floor, phone face down beside him. They pulled him out, handcuffed him. He didn't fight, didn't explain himself, didn't say a single word that I heard. Here is what the police told me over the next hour, standing in that living room. Gerald did not own this apartment. He had no legal connection to the property whatsoever. He was not a property manager. The rental agreement I had signed was not a valid legal document. How he had access to the unit, whether he had been using it as a place to live, and what exactly he intended, none of that was clearly answered for me that night. I pushed for trespassing charges. One of the officers told me the situation was more complex than a standard trespassing case, and that I should vacate immediately and let investigators handle the rest. I slept in my car that night, parked in a well-lit lot 2 blocks from the apartment, and called my dad first thing in the morning. He drove from Indianapolis to Chicago in 4 hours. We loaded everything back into the truck in less time than it had taken to move it in. I found a verified apartment through a legitimate property management company the following week. Background checks, real lease, actual landlord with an actual license. Here's the thing about that chair in the empty room. The thing that still gets to me, even now, years later. It wasn't there by accident. Someone had put it there, positioned it to face the door at exactly the angle you'd need to watch whoever walked in, and whoever did that had been doing it for a while. I don't know how long Gerald had been using that apartment. I don't know what he was watching for or what he thought about, sitting in that chair in the dark. I know that the roommate was fiction. I know that the apartment was borrowed without permission. I know that when I moved in, he was already there. I just didn't know it yet. The basement, the farmhouse. When I was 26, I took a seasonal maintenance job on a large agricultural property outside a small town in eastern Tennessee, about 40 miles from the nearest city of any size. I want to be clear about the geography because it matters. This was not a place where you had many options. The nearest grocery store was 11 miles down a county road. The nearest neighbor was a half-mile through a field of tall grass. When your truck was in the driveway and the lights were on, you were it. The job paid. Well, by seasonal standards, and the physical work suited me. The one thing it didn't include was housing. I asked around among co-workers and was pointed toward an old man about 3 miles up the road who rented out a spare room. Cash by the week, no paperwork. The rate was extremely modest. His name was Earl. He was somewhere in his mid-70s, with the kind of face that had been outside in direct sunlight for most of those years, deeply lined, weathered to a kind of permanent squint. He walked with a slight list to the right and spoke with an economy that I initially read as dignity. He didn't waste words. He didn't ask questions he didn't need answers to. When I showed up, he showed me the room, basic but clean, told me the rate, and that was the entire transaction. "One rule," he said as I was settling in, "stay out of the basement." He said it the same way he said everything, without particular emphasis, without ceremony. The same tone he might have used to tell me which burner ran hot on the stove. I took it as a maintenance matter. Old houses have quirky basements, unstable floors, exposed wiring, whatever. I nodded and thought nothing more of it. My first day passed without incident. My second day passed without incident. The work was tiring in the satisfying way that makes you sleep deeply and wake up functional, and I fell into the rhythm of it quickly. I ate alone, slept early, stayed out of Earl's way. He stayed out of mine. It was a mutually agreeable arrangement. Then I woke up to find him in my doorway. Not in the gentle way of someone checking in. The door had swung open, and he was standing in the frame in a white undershirt and work pants, hand on the doorknob, looking at me with an expression that was doing something I couldn't identify in the dark. Not angry, not worried, something more opaque than either of those. "I know you went down there," he said. His voice had a quality at that hour that it didn't have in daylight. Drier, lower, like it was coming from somewhere further back in his chest. I told him I hadn't been anywhere near the basement. This was true. "Stay out of the basement," he repeated. He closed the door. I heard him walk back down the hall. I lay in the dark for a long time after that, trying to construct a charitable explanation. He was confused. Old men sometimes woke from dreams, convinced of things that hadn't happened. He'd heard the house settling and mistaken it for footsteps. Any of a dozen explanations that would let me go back to sleep without changing my read on the situation. I managed it, barely. But a seed had been planted, and seeds are difficult to ignore once they're in. The door in the corner. 2 days later, on my afternoon off, Earl drove his old truck down the road and disappeared around a bend in the tree line. I watched him go from the kitchen window. The property went quiet, just wind and distant bird sounds and the low creak of an old house making its normal sounds. I stood at the kitchen sink for a long time. The basement door was in the corner of the kitchen. I'd identified it on my first walk through: wooden frame, slightly warped, no window. The ordinary basement door of an ordinary old farmhouse. I'd given it exactly the attention it deserved in the days since. None. I crossed the kitchen and stood in front of it. I want to be honest about this. I was not looking for anything specific. I was not operating on a hunch or a sense of wrongness. I was a 26-year-old with an afternoon off, a door that had been explicitly forbidden to me, and the particular human weakness of not being able to walk away from a closed door once someone has told you not to open it. Earl had done the one thing guaranteed to make me eventually curious. He'd made the basement significant. I turned the handle. The door swung inward. Darkness below. I found the light, a pull string at the bottom of the stairs, and descended. The basement was low-ceilinged and wide. Concrete floor, exposed joists above, the kind of smell that belongs to all old basements everywhere, damp stone and decades of accumulated dust. One wall was lined with metal shelving holding paint cans, mason jars of various sizes, folded tarps, the accumulated miscellany of a working property. A water heater in the corner. A workbench that seemed like the kind any old man would have. Nothing alarming, nothing that would justify a specific, emphatic rule. Then I saw the door. It was set into the far wall, the concrete wall, not the framed one, in a way that didn't quite match the rest of the basement. Heavier. The frame was rougher, more deliberate, and along the bottom of the frame a thick rubber seal, the kind used to create an airtight or near-airtight gap, like weather stripping but more substantial, like something designed to contain whatever was on the other side. The smell was coming from beneath that seal. I knew the smell. I'd worked around animals long enough to recognize organic decay. the specific combination of biological breakdown and chemical sweetness that attaches itself to the back of your throat and doesn't leave. Whatever was behind that door had been decomposing for some time. Not days, longer than days. I should have walked back up the stairs. I know that now. I knew it then in a partial way. The part of you that's still processing information that the front of your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door resisted at first, the rubber seal holding suction, and then gave way with a sound I will not try to describe except to say it was wet and final seeming. The room beyond was approximately 8 feet square. Concrete on all 4 walls, concrete floor, a single exposed bulb overhead that I had to find a second pull string to activate. A workbench along the far wall, its surface stained in patterns that were not paint, not oil, not anything I could attribute to ordinary use. In the corner of the room, stacked 3 high, black plastic bags, heavy and large and shaped in ways I was not going to think about directly. Long enough for what you're thinking, stretched and solid in ways consistent with what you're thinking. And in the upper right corner of the ceiling, mounted with a metal bracket and pointed down at the workbench, a camera, small, efficient, watching the room. I took out my phone and photographed everything I could see from the doorway. I did not go inside. I turned off the light, closed the door, walked back through the basement, up the stairs, through the kitchen, up to my room, and started pushing clothes into my duffel bag. I was 3/4 of the way through packing when I heard the front door slam. He was back. The sprint. I zipped the bag and stood completely still. His boots hit the kitchen floor below me. A pause, then the sound I'd been dreading, the creak of the basement door opening, the first step down. He was going to the basement. I moved. Down the hallway away from the stairs to the kitchen, to the stairs that led to the front of the house, moving as quietly as I could manage while carrying a duffel bag and running on pure adrenaline. I hit the front door, pushed through, crossed the wooden porch, made it to my truck in the gravel driveway. Engine on. In reverse before the screen door had finished swinging shut behind me. Down the dirt road, around the bend, onto the county highway. Floor it. I drove north without stopping for 40 minutes. My brother had a small property up near the state line. I pulled into his driveway at dusk, walked in without knocking, sat down at his kitchen table, and put my phone on the surface with the photo pulled up. He looked at it for a long time. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just looked up at me and said, "Call the sheriff. Right now. Not after dinner. Now." I called 911, gave them Earl's full name, the address, a description of what I'd found, and where, and made absolutely clear that I had documentation. I emphasized my status as a week-long tenant with no prior knowledge of what was on the property. I told them he was likely aware he'd been discovered. The dispatcher told me to stay available and keep my phone on. A deputy arrived at my brother's property about 2 hours later, took my statement, photographed my phone, and left. The following morning, another deputy came to the door. He asked for my ID, confirmed some details from the previous night's statement, and then told me the news. Earl had been taken into custody the previous evening. Officers had arrived at the property while he was in the process of removing material from the basement. He had not finished. The deputy thanked me. He did not elaborate on what was in the bags. He said the investigation was ongoing and that I might be contacted for further follow-up. He was polite throughout. I stayed at my brother's place for 3 weeks, went back to work eventually, found a room to rent in town through a property manager I had vetted carefully. Never drove past Earl's Road again. I think about that camera sometimes, about the angle of it, pointed down at the workbench, recording whatever happened there. About the fact that Earl kept those bags, about the fact that the first thing he did when he got home that afternoon was go directly to the basement without coming upstairs, which means he already knew something was off, which means he might have seen me on camera, going in, coming out. The warning he gave me on my second night, stay out of the basement, still turns over in my mind. Because here's the thing, if he hadn't said it, I never would have gone down there. I would have respected a locked door or a clearly private space, the way any reasonable person renting a room does. He said it because he was trying to control me. Instead, he flagged exactly the one place in that house I was supposed to ignore. Sometimes the most dangerous thing someone can do is warn you about the wrong thing. The photographer move-in day. If you went to college, you remember the feeling. Move-in day has its own specific texture. The organized chaos of it, parents carrying things in wrong directions, the noise of a building filling up with people after a summer of silence, the combination of excitement and low-grade dread that comes with meeting the stranger you're about to share a 12 by 16 room with for the next 9 months. I walked into my dorm room for the first time on a Saturday in late August, carrying 2 duffel bags and a laundry basket, and found my roommate already there. I'll call him Tyler. He was sitting on the edge of his bed with a laptop on his knees, backpack leaned against the wall, not doing anything in particular. He looked up when I came in, dark hair pressed flat against his forehead, glasses with smudged lenses, an expression that wasn't unfriendly, but wasn't anything else either. He was holding the laptop in a way that seemed performative, like a prop rather than something he was actually using. We shook hands. His grip went limp and released too quickly, the handshake of someone who had learned the gesture without fully understanding what it was for. He said, "Hey," once, then looked back at the screen. I told myself I was reading too much into a first impression. Introverted people exist. People bad at small talk exist. I set up my side of the room and made a genuine effort to engage him, asked where he was from, what he was studying, whether he'd been to campus before. His answers were technically responsive to the questions, but communicated almost nothing. 3 words, 4 words, responses that seemed to arrive slightly out of alignment with what I'd asked, like a translation delay. Fine. We were never going to be friends. Fine. I spent the first evening meeting people on the floor. A pre-law kid named Brandon from Cincinnati, a theater major named Darius, who seemed like he'd been living in the building for years already. Both of them had an ease to them that Tyler didn't. When I asked Tyler if he wanted to come hang out with us in the common area, he said he was trying to get ahead on coursework. It wasn't even the first day of classes yet. I came back to the room around 11. Tyler was already in bed, lamp off, curtains drawn tight. I got in quietly and put on something to watch on my phone until I felt tired enough to sleep. Late in the night, I became dimly aware of lights flashing, brief, irregular. I was most of the way asleep, and I filed it under lightning without really thinking about it. There'd been a storm in the forecast, and went back under. The camera. The next morning, my backpack had been moved. I kept it at the foot of my bed, outer pocket zipped, consistent position. It was now several inches from where I'd left it, the outer pocket unzipped. I went through the contents methodically. Nothing appeared to be missing, but things had been shifted. A charger moved to a different section. A notebook opened when it had been closed. I looked at Tyler. He was making his bed with the precise attention of someone who needed to look occupied. "Did you go through my bag?" I asked. The shift in his expression was quick and strange, something recalibrating behind his eyes. And then it went flat, and he said no, with a sharpness that was completely inconsistent with his general demeanor. Not guilty, offended, almost contemptuous. I had no proof. I let it go. For the next 2 days, I paid close attention to the room. Small things kept being slightly off. A book moved a quarter inch. My charger cable coiled differently than I'd left it. The specific wrongness of a space that had been examined carefully in your absence. Tyler was always in the room or coming back to it when I returned. His laptop was always closing as I walked in. On the third night, I decided to stop sleeping. I positioned myself in bed like someone completely unconscious, phone down, breathing slow, eyes closed, and I waited. Rain on the window. Low music from down the hall, the ambient sound of a building settling in for the night. I lay there for what I estimated was close to 2 hours before it started. Flashes. Behind my closed eyelids, brief, regular, not lightning. The intervals were wrong, too controlled, too intentional. I turned over fast. Tyler's arms dropped to his sides the instant I moved. He was sitting upright in his bed, leaned slightly forward, and the motion of lowering his arms was reflexive, the involuntary snap of someone caught mid-action. The room was dark. I couldn't see clearly, but I understood exactly what he'd been doing. "What are you doing?" I said. He said he couldn't sleep. His voice had gone thin and high. I turned back over. Lay there with my jaw tight and my eyes open in the dark. The laptop, I told Brandon and Darius everything the next day in the dining hall. Neither of them laughed. Brandon said I should go to housing services and request a room transfer that day. Darius said, what Tyler was doing had a specific name that I didn't need to hear to understand it wasn't okay. I went to housing services, filled out a transfer request, was told it would be processed within 48 hours. That afternoon, I went back to the room to drop off my bag before my evening class. Tyler was gone, one of the rare times I'd ever come back to find the room without him in it. His laptop was on his bed, lid half open. I know I shouldn't have looked. I want to be clear that I know that. I opened it. The desktop was chaos. Unnamed folders stacked on other unnamed folders, program icons scattered with no apparent logic, image thumbnails overlapping each other in no particular order. I started clicking through. Most of what I found was unremarkable. Class notes, downloads, browser history that didn't tell me anything. Then I found the folder with no name. Photos, not a few. Not a manageable number that could be explained away by any combination of innocent circumstances. Dozens, organized by date. Me asleep, face slack, the angles consistent with photos taken from across the room with a phone flash. Me reaching into my backpack from above, taken while he was presumably standing near my side of the room. Me mid-sentence, shot through a partially closed laptop lid. The interior of my backpack, contents arranged for documentation. My duffel bag open, items laid out like an inventory audit. Every private action I had performed in this room, photographed and filed. I took out my phone and recorded a slow video of the laptop screen, capturing every image I could. Then I deleted every photo I could find, closed the laptop to the exact angle I'd found it, and walked to the housing office without stopping. The staff member who received me was calm and professional. She watched the video I showed her without speaking. She told me the matter would be referred to the University Conduct Office and that I would have a new room across campus by the following morning. I don't know what disciplinary action Tyler received. I was never told, and at a certain point I stopped thinking about it enough to ask. What I didn't stop thinking about was the last night in the room. I lay in my bed completely rigid, earbuds in, volume high, staring at the ceiling. Around 3 in the morning I became aware of the sound of Tyler's mattress springs, the subtle compression that means someone is shifting their weight. Then silence. Not sleep silence. Listening silence. Then, directly above me, close enough that I felt it before I heard it. A quiet exhale. He was standing over my bed. I could not see him. I could not make myself turn over. I lay completely still and waited, and after what I estimated as 45 seconds, I heard the springs creak as he got back into his bed, and that was it. The rest of the night was silent. I was out the door at 7 with everything in 2 bags, and I did not look back at him when I left. My new roommate, a pre-med student named Marcus from Savannah, Georgia, with a drip coffee maker on his desk and a handshake that communicated actual warmth, was the best possible antidote. Normal, real, present. I felt the specific relief of someone who has been holding their breath for days and finally gets to exhale. I still think about Tyler sometimes. I think about what the photos were for. I think about what he was looking for in my bags. I think about standing over me in the dark, breathing quietly, believing I was asleep. I don't know what he wanted. I know I was lucky to leave before I found out. The woman with the knife, Dorothy. When I moved out of my parents' house for the first time, I was 23 years old and operating on optimism and a savings account that looked fine until I compared it against the actual cost of living independently in Phoenix, Arizona. The turning point came from my aunt's close friend Cynthia, who was subletting a furnished 2-bedroom apartment downtown and offered me the second room at a rate I could actually afford. The catch, I'd be splitting the space with one other tenant she'd already placed in the unit. The other tenant's name was Dorothy. She was in her early 60s, white-haired, small-framed, with the unhurried movement of someone who had decided at some point that there was no real urgency to anything. She greeted me the day I moved in with a firm handshake and a smile that seemed unreservedly genuine. Warm eyes, a natural ease, the manner of someone who would make an excellent neighbor. She'd already been in the apartment for a week when I arrived, so the common areas were already arranged and comfortable. I brought my bed, a dresser, and 2 boxes of clothes. That was the extent of it. The first night was quiet and unremarkable. Dorothy retired early. I watched something on my laptop, made tea, went to bed. Everything was fine. The second night, something happened that I spent the next 20 minutes trying to explain away. I was on the couch with the television on, some program I was only half watching, when I noticed movement at the edge of my peripheral vision. I looked toward the hallway entrance. Dorothy was there, half her body visible around the corner of the wall, one hand on the plaster, the rest of her in shadow. She was staring at me, not glancing over, not noticing me in passing, staring at me with an intensity that had no social context I could assign to it. Her expression was completely neutral. "Dorothy, everything okay?" She made a sound. Low and formless, somewhere between a moan and a hum, a sound without clear meaning or urgency. Then she stepped back around the corner and disappeared into the hallway. I sat on the couch for a moment, then called Cynthia. I told her what had just happened. Cynthia paused. "How do you mean?" I described it. The staring, the sound, the disappearance. "I only met her once, about a week ago," Cynthia said slowly. "She seemed completely fine." A pause. "I'll reach out to her." The next morning, Dorothy came into the kitchen while I was making coffee and said good morning with complete normalcy, cheerful, alert, asking how I'd slept. When I gently brought up the previous night, she looked genuinely confused. Not defensively confused, not caught confused. Actually confused in the way of someone who has no memory of a thing that happened. She said she had no recollection of it. I decided it was an isolated incident, a dream she'd half woken from, a brief moment of disorientation, things that happen to people sometimes, especially later in life, especially in new environments. I filed it away and moved on, after dark. Then it happened again. 8 days after I moved in, I was in my bedroom on my laptop, lights off, winding down for the night. The door was closed. 10:30, maybe closer to 11. Knocking, not urgent, not the knock of someone who needed help. Slow, rhythmic, completely even, the kind of knock that sounds automatic rather than intentional, like a mechanism rather than a hand. And underneath it, that sound, low and continuous. The same wordless vocalization from the hallway, coming now from just outside my door. I lay completely still and watched the door. The knocking continued. I counted 63 separate knocks before it stopped. Then silence. Then the sound of shuffling footsteps moving back down the hall. I texted Cynthia everything. For the next week and a half, I developed a system. I watched Dorothy's patterns. During the day, mornings especially, she was warm and engaged. She cooked interesting things and offered to share. She asked questions about my work and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. She was, in the fullest sense, a pleasant person, and then the sun would begin to set. Something shifted in her as the evening came on. Not dramatically, not all at once. A small withdrawal, a slowing, an increasing absence behind her eyes. By 9 or 10 o'clock, she existed in a different register than she had at noon, not aggressive, not alarming, just subtly elsewhere. I started going to my room by 8:30, just to have the door closed before whatever happened to her after dark began happening. It felt dramatic. It also felt necessary. Then one night the knocking came again, and this time, when I was lying in bed listening to it stop and the footsteps retreat, I heard something I hadn't heard before. The soft sound of my doorknob turning. She was trying the handle. The door was unlocked. She could have walked in at any point, but she left. I told myself I was going to call Cynthia in the morning and tell her this had to be resolved, that I couldn't continue under these conditions, that Dorothy needed to be evaluated by someone with actual medical knowledge of whatever was happening to her. I went to sleep planning that conversation. 1:45 a.m. I woke up to the sound of weight on the floorboards, not outside the door, inside the room. I opened my eyes. The room was completely dark, the kind of dark that comes when a city has gone quiet and there's nothing coming through the curtains. But I could make out the shape at the foot of my bed, standing still, the posture of someone fully upright and not quite fully present. "Dorothy," the sound came back, low and tuneless. That same hum she'd been making for weeks, filling the dark room with something formless and wrong. She was wearing her nightgown. Her white hair was loose and disheveled around her shoulders. Her eyes were open, but the quality of her gaze, in the few seconds I processed it before looking lower, was completely empty, like watching light through a window that has nothing on the other side. In her right hand, held loosely at her side, was a large kitchen knife. Not raised, not pointed at me. Just there, at her side, like she'd picked it up on her way to my room without understanding that she'd done it, like it had attached itself to her hand in the kitchen and she hadn't noticed. I screamed. The sound I made was not something I planned or controlled. It was purely physical, the reflex of a nervous system encountering a threat it doesn't have a rational protocol for. Dorothy didn't flinch. She stood at the foot of my bed and continued making her sounds, swaying slightly, somewhere in a version of the world I couldn't access. Then she turned and shuffled out of the room. The moment she cleared the door, I was out of bed, moving, shoving my dresser in front of the door with a scraping sound that probably woke the neighbors. I pressed my back against the wall, slid down it, sat on the floor in the corner. I tried Cynthia. Voicemail. I tried again at 2 o'clock, at 2:30, at 3. I sent texts describing exactly what had happened with the kind of detail that comes from having nowhere to put your fear except into words. I did not sleep again until the sun came up. Even then, only barely. Cynthia arrived that afternoon. Dorothy, in the daylight, was mortified. She sat in the kitchen and apologized repeatedly, and, from every indication I could observe, meant every word of it. She truly had no memory, not of the knife, not of coming into my room, not of any of the nighttime episodes over the previous weeks. She seemed genuinely distressed to learn what she'd been doing in the hours she couldn't account for. Cynthia couldn't evict her immediately. Arizona tenant protection laws required proper notice and a formal process that could take several months. She told me plainly that the fastest resolution for me was to leave and find somewhere else while she managed the situation and got Dorothy into proper care. We researched together that afternoon, Cynthia and I, sitting at the kitchen table while Dorothy napped in her room. We found a name for what was happening: sundowning syndrome, a recognized condition associated with early-stage cognitive decline, in which the transition from daylight to darkness triggers episodes of confusion, agitation, and sometimes aggression in affected individuals. It's documented. It's real. It's the reason hospitals managing dementia patients have specific protocols for evening hours. Knowing the name helped in the clinical sense. It gave the weeks of strangeness a container. Dorothy wasn't malicious. She wasn't a threat in the way Gerald or Earl were threats. There was no deliberate intent, no awareness of what she was doing in those nighttime hours. Whatever version of Dorothy came out after dark was not the Dorothy who offered me half her casserole or asked about my day. But she had still been standing at the foot of my bed in the dark with a knife, and knowing it had a clinical explanation didn't make the image leave. I moved out by the end of the week and stayed with a friend while I found a new place. I hope Dorothy received the care and support she needed. I genuinely mean that. But there are nights, quiet nights, dark rooms, that particular 3 o'clock silence, when I hear something on the floor, a weight I can't immediately place, and I open my eyes faster than I should have to. Old habits from old rooms. The thing about trust. 4 apartments, 4 completely ordinary housing situations, 4 listings that could have come from any rental site, any classifieds page, any word-of-mouth recommendation from a coworker or an aunt's friend. I want to leave you with something that isn't just a list of red flags to watch for, because the truth is that not all of these situations had obvious red flags. Some of them had something subtler, a quiet instinct, an off moment, a detail that didn't quite add up. The kind of thing you notice and then immediately talk yourself out of. The person who found Gerald didn't ignore the chair in the empty room. They ran. The farm worker didn't dismiss Earl's strange warning. They went looking. The college student didn't rationalize the flashing lights. They waited and watched and got out. The young woman in Phoenix didn't go back to sleep when Dorothy left the room with the knife. She blocked the door and waited for morning. None of these outcomes required special training or unusual bravery. They just required one thing: taking the thing that felt wrong seriously, even when the rational explanation was more comfortable. The world is full of people who choose the comfortable explanation. Most of the time, the comfortable explanation is correct. The flashing light is lightning. The quiet roommate is just awkward. The old man's warning is just about unstable flooring. Until it isn't. Trust the voice that notices when something is wrong. It's older than your logic, and it's working in your favor. Check your locks tonight. I mean it.